Turns out having patience pays off, and all of us who've been waiting since 2022 for the release of Metal Slug Tactics are about to be well rewarded. How do I know? Because I've spent 5 hours with the early release demo that you all are about to have access to. My name is Tom, otherwise known as Titanium Legman, and welcome back to the channel.
Metal Slug Tactics!
Hello everyone, if you enjoy what I do, my coverage of turn-based strategy RPGs, strategy games in general, or just gaming as a whole, then a like on this video and a subscription to the channel would be very much appreciated. Thank you so much. So, Metal Slug Tactics. Thank you so much to the good folks at Dotemu and Like Here Studio who allowed me to have early access to the demo of the game. I've spent about 5 hours with it thus far. I would have played more, I just haven't had a whole lot of time. Things have been very busy around here, but I spent a good 5 hours with the demo, and I have to say, I am very impressed. I really didn't know what to expect going into Metal Slug Tactics. We hadn't seen too much of it since it was first announced and then delayed from 2022 to 2024, but it's clear that the team has been putting a lot of work in behind the scenes to make this a really stellar project. If you're watching this at time of release, there should be a demo going live as part of Steam Next Fest, so keep an eye on the Steam page for Metal Slug Tactics there. Should be the same demo that I have had the opportunity to play for the last few days. Do keep in mind, while this is a Steam-only release for the demo, the full game is coming out on pretty much everything, PS4, PS5, Steam, Switch, Xbox, etc. Like, you know the drill, it's coming to all things. And there's only M&K support, mouse and keyboard, for the demo. No controller support at this time, though of course obviously there will be eventually since it's coming to consoles. We're going to talk about a few different things here. First off, the mechanics, breakdown, analysis, how things work, how it's looking, how it's evolving the formula of Into the Breach and making it a lot more fun, forgiving, and accessible in my humble opinion, at least early on in the game. How it feels to play as a roguelite, what the progression for your characters are, etc. And then, of course, the art style, the sound design, that kind of arcadey nature that Metal Slug always brings to the table. We're going to get that general overview out of the way first, so let's get into it. I need to make one thing perfectly clear. I have never actually played a Metal Slug game other than now Metal Slug Tactics. However, I have seen plenty of it from afar, right? I've seen people playing it, I've seen it on YouTube and Twitch streams, and of course it's been just a cultural phenomenon in the gaming sphere for a good long while. References to it abound, examples of all the incredible sprite work are all over the place. So I do have a little bit more than a passing familiarity with the series, even though I have not played the games for myself. So when I say that I loaded this up and it immediately felt like I was playing a Metal Slug game, that should tell you that there's some good stuff going on here. You get dropped in very quickly with some basic tutorialization teaching you how to move your characters around, how firing on enemies works, how taking objectives works, and how you're going to be able to use different aspects of your kit. It does not take long to get through the initial tutorialization before you're dropped into a mission, and you can take 3 characters with you to go and start progressing across the world map and trying to deal with Morden's army. This is definitely a easy to learn, hard to master type of system. There was a lot of things that I wasn't too sure about when it came down to mechanics right off the jump, things like how to maximize my sync attacks or how different terrain elevations work, getting adrenaline, boosting your dodge, all these types of systems that we'll talk about more in depth in a moment. But as I played, I very quickly started to put things together and started to see how I could make different strategies happen without the game needing to shove it in my face. It was pretty good about just setting up situations where I could naturally learn what it was that I was doing and how to do it efficiently over the first couple of hours of gameplay. If you're the type of person that likes to get tutorialized very heavily right off the bat, so you're a little worried about putting in the time to learn a game, don't worry, because the game is just so fun to engage with, even while you're trying to get the finer points of the mechanics down. The sound design is great, all of the animations and sprite work are full of fun, energetic, funny moments, and the game keeps up a good pace of missions being long enough that you can put strategies into play, but not so long that they feel like they start to drag. In the demo, you only have access to the first region of the game. Even once you've cleared it, you don't get access to other regions, though you can replay that same region and get a bunch of unlocks. There's a fair bit of stuff to unlock. You start off on the easiest difficulty, and then you unlock the second, what is the more normal difficulty, definitely where I wanted to be playing as soon as I had access to it, thanks to the new enemies, the mechanics that it brought to the table. There's different mission types that I kept encountering, like I did 4 or 5 runs, I believe, and I had new objectives every single time, different styles of maps, different enemies through every single run, and each run took about 45 minutes to an hour, depending on how much time I spent redoing turns, strategizing, considering and testing things. Once you get it down, I'm imagining that the runs will be even faster, probably close to more of like a 35-40 minutes type deal, which is pretty snappy for a good run of a roguelite. Now, what that'll look like once you get into future regions where there's potentially harder enemies or more involved mechanics, that might change, but at least in the desert zone, it was a pretty snappy run through. Each run that I completed, I got access to more different mechanics, loadouts for the different characters, being able to unlock different weapon types that you'd be able to use with them, buying new skills that you could see then show up as you level up, getting different support weaponry that you could find and then deploy onto the battlefield, and even just unlocking a whole 4th character in Tarma, which I had to complete one run successfully to be able to do. Now, it does look like there's going to be access to a bunch of other characters and loadouts, potentially. You can see there's some screens where it says not available in the demo, and it looks like there's plenty of space that you could fill out with more characters and loadouts and gear options and skills. So we'll have to see exactly what that winds up looking like once the full game comes out in the fall, but I'm imagining that there's going to be a decent amount of variety here that you can go with. In the demo, there's 2 loadouts for each of the 4 characters, and at least 2, if not like 4 or 5 unlockable skills that you can get for them. That's before you even get into support weapons and things like that. So it's a good amount of variety for sure. Overall, I really enjoyed the cadence that each run moved at. Again, not any one mission took particularly long. There was a good variety of terrain and different things you could take advantage of, like explosive barrels, falling cranes, cobras in jars, all that type of fun stuff. And figuring out how the usage of one's regular weapon versus your special weapon should go was one of the more interesting things. So you don't want to burn all of your ammo early on if you're not going to be able to find an ammo resupply along the way. Speaking of which, that is something that is really nice as well. Each mission does have 2 separate objectives, your main and sub-objective. You can fail the sub-objective or not even go for it, and still, as long as you complete the main objective, you're fine. But choosing where you go based on what rewards you're going to get, XP, money, ammo refills, support weapon refills, more reinforcements, etc., made it so that it was interesting to choose where I wanted to go, not just on what the mission type itself was and what the map was, but what I was going to get out of it, which is always good. Finally, before we get into the more nuanced discussion, I did just want to say, I mentioned at the beginning how Metal Slug Tactics seems to be building on the mechanics of Into the Breach and how it's making it a lot more forgiving and fun and approachable. And I really do want to emphasize that because that's one of the things that I've seen a lot of people say about Into the Breach, including some of my friends who've played it. I really enjoy it, but I really had to bash my head against the wall to get into it and figure it out because that game is so unforgiving. And that seems to be what others have said as well. And these are, I'm talking people who are good at strategy games, but it's not a good game at introducing mechanics in a way that make you feel like you can win. It is so easy Into the Breach to get into a scenario that feels completely unwinnable, and you have absolutely no idea what you were supposed to do differently in that given mission or earlier in a run to make sure that you didn't get to that situation. You can eventually figure that out, but it's a big time investment, and it can be very frustrating to try and deal with until you get to that point. A lot of people bounced off the game as a result. With Metal Slug Tactics, you get to play with a lot of the same very engaging mechanics that Into the Breach had, but everything's just turned down a little bit earlier into the game, so you have the opportunity to learn so much more, and I really appreciate that about it. Now, for our mechanics. The main thing to keep in mind is working around sync attacks. Sync attacks are something that I talked about in the initial breakdown of the gameplay trailer that we did last week. These are an attack that will trigger whenever you target an enemy with an attack and you have an ally that is also in range and has line of sight on that enemy who will then follow up and attack. This can chain together for as many allies as you have in range of that enemy, up to 3. Because you can have 3 characters at a time in a map. And making the best use of positioning to make sure that you can get as many sync attacks as possible is going to be key. Most enemies have enough HP that your basic weapon attack is not going to be enough to take them down, so you can either choose to burn limited special weapon ammo to one-shot them, or make sure that you're setting up smart sync attacks so you can use your infinite ammo attacks to bring them down and save your bigger attacks for even bigger, scarier targets like tanks and bosses. I really enjoy this mechanic. It makes actually planning out your moves in a more chess-like fashion very, very important. Not just so you can make sure you're staying out of the way of certain enemies or baiting other enemies with a tankier character, but so you can maximize your damage output and still try to complete whatever objective it is that you're trying to complete. It's a really fun core mechanic that I think is going to help Metal Slug Tactics stand out from other examples in the genre as having a little bit of lifeblood of its own, which is awesome for a game like this. Beyond that, again, there is that limited ammo capability, which is not super unforgiving, especially since there are missions that you can take that will refill your ammo, but it is a situation that I found myself in a couple of times where I'd use just a little bit too much early on and wound up stuck with having a character like Marco who couldn't use his assault rifle, and I was just stuck using his little 3-damage pistol. So it can be a problem, and I imagine on harder difficulties and later maps, it's going to be something that you're really going to have to pay very close attention to. The next big mechanic is the idea of adrenaline and dodge and damage mitigation. This is a really, really interesting one, and I appreciate that the team is going for something like this. They emphasize that Metal Slug is a run-and-gun, side-scrolling, fast-paced game, right? You're always on the move, you're never really standing in one place for very long, you're dodging attacks, you're progressing across a level, and they wanted to keep that spirit alive in Metal Slug Tactics, and I think they did a very good job with it. How it works is essentially the farther you have your characters move in a turn up to their maximum move range, the more damage mitigation they're going to get, even if they're not standing in cover. You can go jump into cover at the end of a turn, which is going to be helpful, but cover is not going to be an end-all be-all. Certain attacks can just pierce it, it will be destroyed over time, etc. So making sure that you're actually planning out how far you're moving to try and get as much damage mitigation as possible is actually hugely important. I completely underestimated how powerful this was going to be when I first started playing the game, and I had a lot of characters losing a lot of HP really early on, which is a big deal because characters only ever have 10 HP. It wasn't until I really leaned into just charging headlong into the enemy, taking some cover, taking as many enemies out as I could with sync attacks, and then standing and laughing as even tank shots were dealing 0 or 1 damage to me, that I got it, that I understood this is a tactics game that you're playing like a run-and-gun game, which is so weird. And I know it probably makes it sound like there's not going to be a lot of strategic depth here, but that could not be further from the truth. Seriously. Like, you have to make so many decisions and be smart about your moves, but also make sure that you're moving as far and as fast as possible, which is fun. It keeps things engaging. It keeps you from just turtling, which is something that often happens when you have a focus on ranged combat in a tactics game. Think about your XCOMs and things like that. How far back can I sit on a map in heavy cover trying to snipe aliens before I get into range and potentially get flanked? Doesn't matter. Cover, weirdly in this, it doesn't even matter if you are flanked. If you're in cover, someone could be standing directly to your side and firing shots into you, and you still get the full benefit of that cover. It doesn't matter. It's more about just staying on the move and being smart about your positioning, which I love. Finally, we have the adrenaline system, which is the other big pillar of the gameplay in MST, as I've been calling it. Not Mystical Space Typhoon for my Yu-Gi-Oh! Players out there, although I keep thinking it myself whenever I abbreviate it. The adrenaline system is something that is akin to like an energy system or a mana system, but again, it leans into that run-and-gun scenario. This is the easiest way to think about it. The more bombastic the actions that you're taking, the more adrenaline you're going to build up, and the more special abilities you're going to be able to use as you move forward. Jumping up and down terrain, taking out enemies, running as far as possible, as fast as possible. These are going to be the things that give you more adrenaline, which will then unlock your special abilities, which can be very, very powerful. From utility pieces like Fio's little UFO that you can use to grab an enemy or an ally and move them around, awesome. Or things like Tarma being able to hop on his motorcycle and plow through a whole group of enemies, dealing a ton of damage and giving himself dodge in the process. There's a lot of different options here, and you'll get more as you level your characters up and unlock them, which we'll talk about next. Overall, I really like the adrenaline system, and similar to the damage mitigation systems, it took me a little bit to kind of understand what I was doing with it, but once I did, it became a ton of fun, and I'm really excited to see how getting further into the game and unlocking more regions is going to play into how you utilize adrenaline. Something to keep in mind when you're looking at these skills and attacks is the fact that they do cost your action in a lot of cases. Not always, but they do. And of course, we should note that characters have a move action and a regular like attack action. If you take your attack action before you move, you lose your move. Some abilities give you a bonus move or a bonus action. It'll be described in the ability if it does and how to unlock it. But at baseline, you get a move and you get an attack. So don't think that you can just be like, oh, well, I'm going to be able to spam a bunch of attacks because I have a bunch of adrenaline. I'll use my basic attack, use a bunch of adrenaline. No, not how it works in most cases. They're not, like, they're both going to cost your action points. As far as character progression is concerned, you will level up maybe 2 or 3 times over the course of a run in a given region. It's not a set in stone, you're going to level these characters through the whole campaign type of scenario, but each level that you get is very impactful. It allows you to upgrade your weapons with different skills attached to them. It allows you to unlock different skills for your characters in particular, and it's a good way to set up a type of mini build over the course of a run. For example, I had 2 different builds that I did with Tarma over the course of the 4 or 5 runs that I did once I had unlocked him. One, I had him set up as an insane damage mitigation dodge tank, where I would have him moving as far as possible, spamming his motorcycle so that he could get a bunch of dodge, take out a bunch of enemies, and then stand in the middle of the enemy formation and draw all of their aggro while my other characters got set up for sync attacks. And then the other build, I had a really intensely powerful melee attack build, because Tarma's basic weapon is just a knife, it's not a ranged weapon, where he was getting bonus damage on enemies that didn't have any damage on them already, and he had a ton of move. So I was able to sprint him across the battlefield and essentially assassinate high priority targets with one attack, letting other characters deal with objectives or other slightly tankier enemies that couldn't just be one shot without having to worry about things like snipers, grenadiers, all that. Tarma was able to just take them off the battlefield. Those are just two quick examples of things that I was able to do with Tarma's just base build, without switching up what his loadout was, without giving him a bunch of different skills or levels. It was really cool, and I'm hoping that there's going to be a lot of different variability in the game for all the different characters to keep things fresh as you go through. The last thing I want to mention mechanically is some of the other side support abilities and more back-end systems that the game has going on. First of all, you do have a reinforcement system. This is, you can see it here, what I was kind of equating to the power system in Into the Breach when I didn't know what it was that we were working with here. But what this actually is how many continues you have for your characters. Yes, this is literally a little one-up coin, like in an arcade machine, where if a character gets downed on a mission, you can choose to use one of your reinforcements to get them back up. Now, this is nice because it means, obviously, like, if you lose one character and you only have 3 to begin with, it could be a huge power swing, but also it allows you to actually move where they are on the battlefield within a certain range. So someone can get downed, you can get them up on the next turn, and you can actually pull them forward to be in range with your squad and then still get their move as well. So it's pretty handy. You might even be able to find some tricky little situations and scenarios where you let a character get down so you can move them further than they would otherwise be able to move. They're just a little bit of an idea, a little bit of a thought that I had. This is nice though, because again, it's just a softer version of what Into the Breach had going on, where as soon as a mech got destroyed, you would lose that pilot. And pilots were such a high investment over the course of a run that losing them was incredibly devastating. Here, you're not losing Tarma, you're not losing Fio. Everyone gets up at the end of the mission anyway, but this way, if you need their firepower during the given map that you are on, you can spend a 1-up to get them up, and you can get more reinforcements as mission rewards later on. Finally, you have tanks, or slugs as they are called, as I am learning. So I'm learning my parlance here with Metal Slug, and these things are so insanely busted. Like, again, I don't know how it's going to be for higher difficulties or different regions, but man, being able to call in a Metal Slug as a support weapon is a hysterically overpowered thing. Like, you only get one, and then you have to find another one. It is a consumable use ability, but the amount of armor as extra HP that you get for the character that hops into the Metal Slug, and then the amount of damage that they can put out is gross. I essentially one-rounded the boss of the first area by having Tarma hop into a Metal Slug, because you can fire all of its weapons simultaneously so long as you have the fuel or the energy to do so, which, when you first bring the Metal Slug in, it has full fuel, so you can just go hog wild on something. It was a disgusting amount of damage. It might be kind of broken. They might need to be balanced, but we'll see. Again, higher difficulties and future regions could change that opinion. It is a ton of fun, though. Being able to say, no, I'm going to deploy the nuclear option and actually having it wipe everything off the map that you want it to, it's pretty great. It is very enjoyable. I mentioned it previously, but as a quick overview, I do like the roguelite nature of Metal Slug Tactics, being able to put a run in, come back to base, get some new unlocks, buy a new loadout or two for your characters, have a shop show up, or have the armory show up so you can get different gear, different skills. It is very enjoyable. I'm hoping that there's a lot of unlocks like that as we move forward. There is the possibility that you could wind up running a little bit dry on upgrades. We'll have to see what actually comes with the full release. But as far as the demo was concerned, it felt like a good cadence, and it felt like there was a good amount of stuff that you could do. As far as the art style, the sound design, that kind of arcadey nature, it's all phenomenal. Every single sprite animation is so cute, it's so fun. Little scimitar-wielding dudes hucking their sword at you before pulling another one out of their mouth because they just have an infinite supply of those is great. all of the characters picking themselves up, shaking their heads when they get hit by a grenade, and then rallying themselves, the different animations for different skills, the cut-ins of character portraits. It just has so much fun, chaotic energy that I would fully expect from an arcade-style game like this, that the original Metal Slug games obviously all have in spades as well. The sound design is also really strong. There's a couple of attacks that stand out as perhaps being a little overtuned. One of the attacks of the big final boss at the end of the first zone comes to mind. It is deafeningly loud. It could probably be tuned down a little bit, maybe have a little bit of a variety of sound in there instead of the same one looped a bunch of times. But those are things that can be tweaked leading up to the release. I'm not too worried about that. And just, again, that arcadey nature, like, you literally feed one-ups to your guys to get them back on their feet. Like, it's just so much fun. You're jumping around. Nothing's taken too seriously. All the characters are just having fun. You're out there beating up bad guys, trying to take down terrorists and rebels, and it's a good time. It's a good all-around time. I am very pleased with the atmosphere and energy that Metal Slug Tactics seems to have. So how do I feel about it overall? Real good, man. Real good. You never know how a tactics reimagining of an existing series is going to go, especially one that's been fairly dormant for so long like Metal Slug has been. But it seems like the team is really understanding what makes a good mechanical strategy game work. It's not going to be a super in-depth, long campaign like something like Unicorn Overlord, but that's okay. It's a nice change of pace to have something that just goes. And I think the roguelite genre suits that energy that Metal Slug has very, very well. It's really clear that a lot of time and effort has gone into making that soul of Metal Slug present here. So much so that, again, like, I can feel it, and I've only ever seen the games from afar. Remember, I've not played these games, but it feels like a Metal Slug game. Maybe longtime fans of the series are going to have a different opinion. By all means, you can let me know in the comments if that is true, but I think it has everything that it needs to have to be a part of the series. I am slightly concerned about how replayability is going to go, as I mentioned previously, but again, that's only with one region available out of 4. There's going to be a lot of variety there once the full game comes out, I'm sure. But for me personally, roguelites are a very delicate balance of engaging and, okay, I'm done with this. But I think it's going to be fine, but we'll have to see once the full release comes out. I want to see more loadouts for characters to keep things fresh, change potential strategies. And I want to see more evolution of these different mechanics that Into the Breach kind of created, and just have it be refined, have it be more fun, more accessible, more interesting for a wider audience. With that said, though, I'm going to wrap this one up here. I hope that you all enjoy that demo. If it's out by the time I put out this video, we'll have to see how timing works. Thank you again to Dotemu and Like here for having early access provided to me to Metal Slug Tactics. I'm definitely going to be covering it once it releases in the fall. Guides, videos, streams, the works. It's going to be great. So keep it tuned here for that if you are at all excited for Metal Slug Tactics, which you should let me know. What do you think? If you enjoyed what you've seen here in this video, in the trailers, in the pre-release material, I want to hear about all of it because I think this one's going to be a lot of fun and I'd love to be able to talk with y'all about it more. Finally, my name has been Tom, otherwise known as Titanium Legman. I hope you all have a good night. Stay safe and healthy out there. And remember, be good to each other. Bye now. God, Fio's going to have me acting up, man. Jeez, look at her. Ah!